Hello, all you beautiful seekers out there. I'm your host, Samantha, and this is the Sage Witch Mooncast. Just a quick reminder before we get started, if you like what I do and want to show your support, you can click in the link in the description for buymeacoffee.com to show your support. This week's podcast is something of a companion podcast to last week's episode on minimalism. This week, we'll be talking about sustainability and how to be something of an eco-friendly witch. Witchcraft is not a religion. It's a craft. But I feel it's safe to say witchcraft usually includes some kind of nature-based elements. My personal craft and spirituality are completely nature-based. It inspires me. Because of that, I consider sustainability to be very important. I cannot claim to revere nature while I destroy it. Before we get into sustainable witchcraft items, I feel there is something else we should touch on first. I know sustainable, eco-friendly options are just not available to everyone. Maybe you live in a rural place or don't have a lot of money. And some eco-friendly things can be pretty expensive or maybe hard to find where you live. Maybe you don't have the space or time to grow your own herbs. No one should ever feel shamed or invalidated because of their circumstances. I live in a rural place. The nearest occult shop is a 13-mile drive to my closest town. That might not sound very far, but especially for people without reliable transportation, it might as well be 100 miles. I'm fortunate to have a good working vehicle. I live in what is called a food desert, meaning there are at least 100 houses where I live, and not a grocery store within a half a mile. And there are many who live out here who do not have transportation. I understand not everyone has access to occult shops and eco-friendly options, let alone grocery stores. I want to be crystal clear. Even if you bought all your altar items at a dollar store, your practice is just as valid as any others. Sustainability is something of a buzzword these days and has developed a very special aesthetic. Muted colors, natural fibers, and with these, a hefty price tag at times. But sustainability is so much more than its aesthetic, much like witchcraft. One part of sustainability people often miss is to simply make less waste. If you buy something from a dollar store or a thrift store and plan to reuse it over and over again, you are creating less waste than someone who is constantly buying something new. In fact, I have found many beautiful, very unique items in thrift stores. When you buy something from a thrift store, you are giving something a new life, a new purpose, and you're keeping it from going into a landfill. And more often than not, you're also donating to a good cause, as many thrift stores are run by charities. Never underestimate the power of thrift shopping. If you listened to my last podcast on minimalism, you can understand how minimalism and sustainability go hand in hand. Personally, I choose to work with a few herbs and stones I've formed a strong bond with. They're special to me. They are sacred. Because of this mindset, I use less and make less waste. I still have a variety of options though. The stones and herbs I use have been carefully and thoughtfully chosen to aid me in my workings. Does that mean I don't use more exotic plants in my spells? No, it does not. I have a very small vial of sandalwood I keep on my shelf, but I have had that same vial for over 10 years now. I bought it well before I was aware of the ecological impact of sandalwood, which is something I will cover in just a moment. If I do choose to use it in a spell, I know how precious it really is, and use it very sparingly and with the utmost respect. But for the most part, I use herbs that either I have grown myself or that grow well in the climate I live in and have been harvested as locally as possible. I find herbs I grow myself serve me just as well as those I would buy from a store or online. Sometimes even better, because I have taken the time to bond with the plant, to care for it, and to lend my own energy to it. Many things in witchcraft present ethical and ecological issues. Sandalwood, for example, is heavily guarded as poachers have stolen this valuable wood for profit. It is also endangered and has to travel many, many miles to get to me. As I mentioned previously, when I do choose to use sandalwood, I use very little, knowing these things, if any at all. White sage, commonly sold in occult shops and even gift shops, is sacred to the Native Americans. Because of the demand for it, this sacred plant can be over-harvested unceremoniously, leaving less for these indigenous peoples. Not to mention, Native Americans have suffered incredible discrimination over their own sacred practices, and only recently have been able to openly practice those beliefs. If I'm going to burn sage, I do my absolute best to ensure I purchase it from Native American-owned businesses and to burn very little, with the utmost respect. You may feel like I am stating the obvious, but you do not need to burn an entire bundle of sage at once. A single leaf will do. Or you can always consider making your own herbal bundles. Some of my favorites include rosemary, lavender, mugwort, and cedar and pine that I gather from my own backyard. There's an added bonus if you can grow and harvest these plants yourself. Rosemary usually does well in a pot on the patio or porch, as does lavender. If you can't grow them yourselves, some of these can be found fresh in grocery stores, or if you have one near you, a farmer's market. Farmers markets are wonderful, as they directly contribute to small businesses, your local economy, and have traveled few miles to get to you. It is also common for witches to use charcoal discs to burn incense blends. While I've done this in the past, I find the smell of charcoal to be far too overpowering, especially indoors. Besides, charcoal is not exactly a sustainable option. Instead, I have a few incense brands I use, like Nippon Kodo. These incense sticks are, well, stick-free and have a light scent to them, which is very nice for those with sensitive sinuses and lungs. Because they are stick-free, there's no waste. I like that they use minimal packaging that can be recycled. And they're also pretty transparent about their ethical practices. And no, I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I just really like the brand. But I wouldn't say no. Now, let's talk about stones. Some of the most beautiful stones mined are done so at the expense of the worker. These workers toil and are often exploited for their labor, being paid a mere pittance for their hard work. Some of these are even children. It does not serve me, the planet, the people, and my witchcraft path to benefit from the suffering of others. If at all possible, find out where your stones come from and how they are collected. The last eco topic I want to cover is what to do with what is left over from a spell. Usually there's a bit of wax, water, herbs, or incense ash. While it is common practice to bury these things in the ground, they aren't always good for wildlife and the little ecosystems in the ground. If you're going to bury something, make sure what you're burying isn't going to harm local wildlife. I like to spread incense ash around my home for protection, and any water that has been on my altar to water plants. Leftover wax can be a bit of an issue, as we usually don't want to reuse candles used for spell work. You can always store leftover wax in a sealed jar, cleanse it, and repurpose it into new candles once you have enough. Once you've cleansed it and repurposed it, I see no problem with using it in future spell work. I know there are people who will disagree with me on this, but energy only lingers if you allow it to. Now, I am not perfect in this, and I don't expect anyone else to be either. But I do all I can to approach witchcraft with mindfulness and respect. That's what works for me. And I don't judge or shame anyone for their practices. So that is about all for today. Remember, if you want to keep updated on what I'm doing, you can follow me on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at The Sage Witch, and now on TikTok also under the name The Sage Witch Talk, spelled T-O-K. Thank you all for joining me today. I wish you all the best of the seasons.